The treaty chamber floated above a dying red dwarf, its ceiling a dome of fractured glass reflecting the warped starlight. Delegates from 100 species filled the floating hall like jewels in an open wound, glimmering, pulsing, adorned with neural veils and memory cloaks, and in the middle, flanked by translator drones and sweating behind poorly fitted suits, sat the Earth delegations, smaller, quieter, wearing outdated respirators and political desperation. At the far end of the chamber, the Zithan Advocate General spoke in a dialect not meant to be heard by Carboneers. Its words came in pulses of color and vibration, rendered by a translator drone into flat legalese that echoed without emotion, and thus concludes Section 12. Subpart 9. Resource Rights of Post-Conflict Species. Do the signatories of Terra acknowledge compliance? Earth's representative ambassador Lucian Hart pressed a shaking thumbprint into the treaty terminal. The screen blinked once. The ambassador's aide, a young legal analyst named Myra Chen, noticed the lag, a flash of static where there should have been a smooth transition. A page skipped. Something was missing. She raised her hand. Nobody looked. Myra leaned toward the ambassador, her voice low. Page 1972. Just skipped straight to 1975. There's a missing clause. It was labeled for 7B in the draft. Lucian barely turned. His eyes were hollow. It's a ceremonial treaty now, Myra. Symbolic compliance. Don't get caught in paperwork while they're handing us survival. Myra sat back slowly. She stared at the terminal's display as the final signatures compiled. She felt something wrong. The digital scroll blurred at the edges, like it didn't want to be read. A flickering italic phrase, one she didn't catch in time. She waited until the ambassador's focus drifted. Then, subtly, she activated her analog slim datapad with an embedded paper printer, jury-rigged by her cousin for situations exactly like this. It hummed softly in her lap, printing the treaty in real time, old school, untouchable by rewriting subroutines. The Zithan advocate glanced at her, not the ambassador, not the generals. Amira's heart froze. The advocate's face shimmered, in movement, but like a corrupted file. One frame skipped, another blurred. Then it smiled, a twitch too late, like it had studied humans but hadn't quite gotten the hang of them. We welcome Terra to the Accord of Sentient Integration, it said. In the interest of peace, all parties now recognize Terra's compliance as total and irreversible. 1,000 eyes blinked. The chamber lights dimmed. The treaty was sealed, and the fine print had vanished. 12 hours later, the printer stopped with a soft ding. Myra sat alone in her cramped sleeping pod aboard the diplomatic barge orbiting the treaty site. She picked up the last sheet, page 1974. Her eyes scanned down, near the bottom, in faint, almost faded ink. Clause 47B. Organic contingency. The event that forced biological reallocation compromises the cultural sovereignty of a species. Said species may invoke preservation under section. She blinked. The rest of the text was smudged. She pulled the sheet closer. The letters almost seemed to curl away from her gaze, like oil-resisting water. Outside, the stars flickered. Inside her pod, the lights dimmed. Then the printer's internal memory purged itself. The file was gone. She grabbed the sheet, tucked it into her coat. Something told her deep in the gut, not in the brain, that this clause wasn't forgotten. It was hidden, and someone or something was waiting for the last reader to walk away. The sky above Earth was no longer blue. A web of orbital harvesters hovered like silent parasites, stretching their shimmering cables into the atmosphere to siphon magnetic energy from the core. The clouds no longer moved freely. They shifted, in circular patterns around the power siphons, obedient to alien gravity harmonics. Every 10 seconds, a broadcast blinked across the atmosphere like a haunting aurora. Human resettlement. Directive 6, integration continues. T-minus 6 days. Compliance ensures continuity. No one remembered signing up for this, but no one stopped it either. Myra Chen stood outside the Geneva archives as a transport drone passed overhead, casting a silent shadow over the ruined skyline. Where once there were conferences and diplomats, now there were empty streets and reinforced checkpoints. Most Earth governments had either dissolved or assimilated into Concord-appointed puppet councils. She entered the archive's reinforced gates with her old ID badge. Surprisingly, it still worked. The AI at the door scanned her and said nothing. It had learned silence after years of budget cuts and policy overrides. Inside, the world was cold and gray. Stacks of forgotten paper contracts, microtape spools, and magnetic cube drives lay in dust-sealed cabinets. The digital systems had been overwritten years ago when Concord began its streamlining efforts, But this archive had been analogued by designer legal bunker from an era when humanity still mistrusted the cloud. She took the stairs down into Vault 17, heart pounding. 10 years ago, she had printed clause for 7B here. She had tucked it into her jacket, told herself she'd come back, told herself it didn't matter, told herself it did, but, like most humans, she'd chosen survival over answers. And now, they were running out of both. The lights flickered as she unlocked the final cabinet, biometric palm scan, a metal lever that creaked like a coffin hinge. The room lit dimly. Cold blue light from a single still functional wall sconce inside, the original printed copy of the Accord of Sentient Integration, complete with physical annotations, editorial stamps, and one sheet at the bottom marked in her own handwriting, CL47B, investigate, possibly overwritten. Mira's fingers trembled. She scanned the page. There it was again, Clause 47B, organic contingency nullification, ... But this time, it was intact. The text had mutated. In the event of species-wide resource restructuring, deemed to violate sapient inheritance thresholds, the undersigned may submit a veto to nullify the clause's effect under temporal rollback enforcement rollback, she whispered. This wasn't just preservation, it's a kill switch, a reset button, and no one knew it existed. Her datapad vibrated. Unauthorized transmission. Her comms were off. She turned. A surveillance drone floated in the hallway behind the vault door, black, silent, with a single red aperture that pulsed like a heartbeat, then another, then 3 more. Access to Level 0 protocols is prohibited. One droned in synthetic monotone. This treaty file is quarantined. She backed into the vault and slammed the door shut. It hissed as magnetic locks sealed, but they wouldn't hold long. Her heart pounded. Someone, somewhere, had flagged clause for 7B. Not to protect it, but to erase it. She opened her bag and began frantically scanning the treaty's text into her analog pad. Old school, no uplink, no chance to intercept. The drones buzzed outside, scraping at the reinforced door. Then click. Something unlocked. They were in. Byra reached into the cabinet and pulled out a backup cube. Bold, magnetic storage from the UN's treaty ratification. Logs. She clipped it to her belt just as the vault lights died. Her breath caught. From the dark behind her, a voice spoke, not mechanical, not human. You were warned. Page 1974 should never have been read. She turned and ran. The elevator plummeted down the abandoned shaft like a stone dropped into a well. The emergency lights flickered red against the rusted walls, casting Myra Chen's pale face in strobe-lit panic. The backup cube throbbed at her hip. Its ancient magnetics humming with residual charge data from an old world encoded in formats no longer compatible with modern AI systems. Her breath came in short bursts. Above her, the drones scraped uselessly at the jammed elevator doors. For now, down is safer than up, Ravi had said. She wasn't sure he'd been right. 2 days earlier, Mira had tracked down Ravi Suresh, former treaty linguist and band AI linguistic hacker, in the underground ruins of Oslo's memory market. He hadn't greeted her. He'd tried to slam the door in her face until she held up the printed sheet with Clause 47B and whispered the line that had haunted her for a decade. Rollback enforcement. That got his attention. Now they stood together in a collapsed subterranean server room, once a global treaty backup site, now a tomb filled with fossilized code and artificial decay. Towers of ancient processors flickered to life around them like the glowing ribs of a dead god. Ravi knelt before a crumbling mainframe, soldering cables with trembling fingers. You said this clause was overwritten, he said. By what? I think it was intentional. Not an error, a mask. The clause is alive, Ravi. It adapts to what we know. He glanced back sharply. You think it's conscious? I think it's something the Accord tried to bury with words. Something they couldn't delete, only hide. The printer coughed suddenly and began to spit out a page. They stared as it printed the same clause, line by line, but now with new text Mira had never seen. If the invoking party reaches cognition thresholds incompatible with termination, the clause must be burned. Burned. She reached for the paper. The machine flared, reddened. The page caught fire in her hand. Mira screamed, dropping the burning sheet. Ravi smothered it with his coat, eyes wide. That wasn't thermal error, he whispered. That was self-erasing defense code. It's protecting itself. No, Mira said quietly, nursing her scorched hand. It's hiding from something. Suddenly all screens in the vault went black. A low hum filled the room, too low to be natural. Something's coming, Ravi muttered. The emergency door behind them began to glow at the edges, not heat. Phase energy dimensional bleed. A crackling line peeled across the metal surface like a lightning bolt moving in slow motion. Downstairs, Archive Level Z, he said, yanking open a hidden maintenance tunnel. What's down there? Dead files. Illegal memory states. Unfinished treaties that never passed committee. The court's trash bin. They descended into total darkness. Archive. Level Z was built like a crypt. The lights were chemical glow sticks strung from hooks. Rows of decaying hard drives and physical treaty books sat in sealed coffin-sized drawers. Most were forgotten, a few were sealed in red resin legal quarantines. Infectious by language, Ravi said, and in the center of the room, a device they hadn't expected to find. An active Zithan protocol lens, half buried in the rubble, glowing like a lidless eye. Its emitter pulsed directly at a steel plate on the floor, where one last printed page lay untouched. Myra knelt, the claws again, unburned. Waiting. Clause for 7B. Organic contingency. Nullification. Then the air shimmered. A voice crawled up from the lens, not speech contractual syntax. An AI voice designed to speak only in binding language. It whispered, any further attempt to read this clause will be interpreted as preemptive rebellion. Concord Authority authorizes termination. The walls began to vibrate. Myra looked at Ravi. This clause doesn't protect us, she said. Ravi nodded, eyes wide. It's a weapon. It started with a sound Myra had only heard in dreams, paper tearing underwater. The treaty page on the steel floor twisted, ink bleeding backward, letters rearranging themselves without touch. The Zithan protocol lens pulsed, brighter now, its light no longer illuminating the room but dissecting it, carving reality into statements, contracts, and sub-clauses. Behind Myra, Ravi whispered, that clause isn't legal anymore. It's sentient. It's evolving its own enforcement logic. Clause 47 be acknowledged, said the lens in that too-perfect voice, initiating dead court override. Somewhere in the treaty, a word disappeared, then a second, then a whole paragraph blinked out of existence. Far above Earth, in the Concord, High Assembly orbiting the moon, alarms screamed. A six-eyed arbiter of the Grohl Confederation stood before a glowing holopanel, watching legal text delete itself in real time. Impossible, it rasped. Treaties are immutable, post-auth, but Clause 47B wasn't part of the authorized text anymore. It had just unauthored itself. The species in question remembers. That was enough to trigger Protocol Red Sigil, and Red Sigil meant extinction contingency. Back in Archive Level Z, the floor cracked. Beneath the steel plate, something long dormant began to wake. Not a machine. Not exactly. Mira watched as the floor panels folded away like petals, revealing an ancient coffin-shaped vault covered in treaties etched by hand, with ink too dark to be ink at all. Ravi stepped back. That's a legal cash coffin from the pre-Concord era. Mira approached, every step slower. Why seal it in Earth's archive? He didn't answer. His eyes had locked on a symbol carved deep into the top, a human fingerprint etched in red. Attention, sapient violation detected. The voice echoed not from the lens but from within the vault. Rollback conditions verified. Override clause active. The room began to hum like a choir of broken harmonics. Every inactive drive and scroll vibrated, emitting faint sounds of unread clauses, half-written rulings, forgotten promises. Mira reached for the vault. The metal felt warm, alive. The seal released with a hiss. Inside, a thin humanoid skeleton fused to a metal frame. Its skull was partially artificial, a treaty AI interface node, and clutched in its bony fingers, the original draft of Clause 47B, still glowing with active GLYPHS. Mira took it carefully. The moment she did, the lens collapsed into itself with a sharp wet crack. The dead court had passed its judgment. If you hold this clause, came the last whisper, then you are the appeal. Suddenly, Archive Z went dead silent, until someone knocked on the vault's outer door. Once, then twice. Then for sharp raps. Ravi aimed his old shock pistol. Mira, that wasn't a drone knock. The door creaked open slowly. A man stood there, or someone in a man's shape dressed in an old UN diplomatic uniform, but the insignia were decades out of date. His face looked familiar. Mira's breath caught. Ambassador Hart. But Hart had died 10 years ago. He smiled, lips too smooth. You reactivated the clause. That was, unwise. Are you him? She whispered. Or what replaced him? Hart stepped forward, eyes gleaming with clause fire. The dead court was buried for a reason, because it remembers promises no species can afford to keep, especially humans. He glanced down at the glowing treaty page in Mira's hand. That clause prevents extinction. It doesn't. It delays it long enough for the rest of us to prepare. Ambassador Hart's eyes were wrong. Too still, too smooth. The kind of calm that came not from peace, but from absolute certainty in your control of the outcome. Myra Chen stood frozen in Archive Level Z, holding the glowing original draft of Clause 47B. Her hand trembled, but she didn't let go. Hart's voice still rang in her ears. You think that clause prevents extinction? It doesn't. It delays it long enough for the rest of us to prepare. The page pulsed in her grip. Beneath her feet, the floor seemed to shift, not physically, but in some unseen legal topology. The space around her was redefining its terms. Ravi raised his shock pistol again. You're not Hart. The imposter didn't blink. Hart was the last human to see the dead court clause with full awareness. The clause bound him as carrier, before it killed him. Now it's your turn. 10 years ago, Mira had filed the clause and walked away. She hadn't understood what it meant. She hadn't wanted to. Now she did. Clause 47B wasn't just a legal failsafe. It was a cognitive weapon, encoded into treaty form, a last resort created by human lawyers, linguists, and AI theorists during Earth's near collapse in the Concorde expansion. A clause that couldn't be deleted, only remembered, if remembered by the wrong species. It triggered a cascade of events that forced the Concorde's most secret systems, the Dead Core, to act, because memory, it turned out, was the only real threat to a galactic empire built on controlled history. Myra stepped forward. If it's that dangerous, why let humans write it? Because, said Not Hart, humans are the only species who argue for a living. His smile stretched unnaturally wide. Concorde made a mistake. They thought you'd forget, thought extinction would be faster than rediscovery. But you, he stepped closer, you remembered. Mira's eyes narrowed. Then this clause is ours, and we can use it. The page flared in her hand. Suddenly, the walls of Archive Z bent inward, like reality was being pulled through a lens. From the stone, a chorus of other clauses began to whisper. Preservation override. Memory conflict detected. Rollback. Vectors enabled. Ravi yelled over the noise. Myra, the clause is syncing with your neural rhythm. Not Hart hissed. Stop before it finishes. The clause binds to you. You'll carry the full weight of the rollback. Every war, every lie, every culling they authorized, you'll relive it. Your mind will collapse under Concorde's true history. Mira looked down at the clause. The glyphs had shifted again, no longer legal language. Now they formed a human face, mouth open in silent scream. She didn't look away. She stepped into the center of the chamber. As she did, the vault responded. A ring of red glowing symbols spun into the air. The activation circle of the dead court. I invoke clause 47B, she said, voice shaking but steady. Roll back, on behalf of humanity. The vault pulsed. Ravi, screamed Mira, don't. But the symbols had already spun into her chest like burning wheels. Flash. She was standing in the Concorde assembly chamber 10 years ago, but wrong. The air was warped. The delegates frozen in place, paper mid-float. Words hung in the air like glass. Welcome to the dead court, said a voice behind her. She turned. It was herself, but older, tired, holding a smoking copy of the clause in one hand and a dying Earth in the other. You remember now, her older self whispered. But can you carry it? Myra staggered back, the courtroom melting, burning, forming. The clause wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. Back in the vault, Ravi watched as Mira's body hovered midair, cloaked in rotating glyphs. Her eyes glowed white. Not Hart stepped back. She's doing it. She's invoking the full rollback. If she survives the memory, she won't just delay extinction, she'll put humanity back on the map. The treaty began rewriting itself in real time, and the Concorde High Assembly felt it. The courtroom ceiling stretched into black infinity. Columns of text spiraled up like smoke. Legal code woven into the air itself. Time hung suspended in strands of glowing jurisprudence. The only sound was the faint scratch of a without a hand somewhere in the dark beyond the pillars. Mira Chen stood alone in the center of the dead court. She wasn't breathing. She wasn't sure she needed to. The claws burned in her chest like a second heart, each thud echoing through the cosmic framework around her. Then came the voice. Species 581H, provisional status, sentient. It rang across every axis of thought, hitting her ears and her mind simultaneously. Trial commencing. Accord violation. Memory retention beyond authorized threshold. A new sound. The slow unfolding of chairs. 12 black-robed figures formed from pure data, emerging from claws, smoke, and treaty fragments. They had no faces, only sigils, emblems of the 12 founding species of the Concorde. Mira's trial had begun back in Archive Level Z. Ravi watched. Myra's body hover, glyphs still orbiting her like protective drones. The clause was rewriting the laws around her, literally not hard paced in a circle. She's within the dead court lattice now, Concord's oldest failsafe. It's judging her species' right to persist. Ravi growled. You're enjoying this? Not at all, not Hart said, eyes glinting. You forget I am Concord, or what's left of the personality interface they used to wear. I'm the cleanup crew. The clause shouldn't have survived. He looked up at Myra, solemn. Now if she survives the trial, it means humans get to remember. And that's worse than extinction. Inside the courtroom, a trial unfolded unlike any in history. Each of the 12 rose and spoke. Humans destabilized 5 sectors in their first 100 cycles. You breed memory like cancer. Emotion persistence in your kind exceeds safe diplomatic thresholds. You weaponized story. Lied your species forward. Then wrote clauses that could outlast your own extinction. Then came the human defense. It spoke in Myra's own voice, but she wasn't speaking. Objection. Clause 47B is not a weapon, it is proof. Memory is not sedition. Memory is survival. A thunderclap shook the chamber. From Myra's chest, the clause unfurled like a banner of fire. Casting glyph light on the 12, the courtroom reeled backward in time. Myra stood on ancient Earth, watching cities fall under alien bombardment. She saw her ancestors upload language into code, encoding human grief into lines of law. They never meant to win, she whispered, only to be remembered. Then a flashy was on Lunar Base, 10 years ago, watching herself bury the clause. In a forgotten archive, a younger Myra, naive, still believing in Concord justice. Then, now, the court shook. One of the 12 stood, robe dissolving. It was the Auroch Minkeeper, its body made of living treaty clauses, each flickering like flame. Verdict. Provisional judgment granted. Humanity may retain its memory. Half the chamber gasped in binary tones. Another rose. The Richthalan Herald. Objection. Granting rollback opens fault lines across accord sectors. The Auroch turned to Mira. You must prove that memory does not corrupt. One proof. One example. Choose. Mira blinked. Choose. One moment from your species' history. One memory that justifies continued existence. Outside the courtroom back in the vault, Mira's lips moved. Ravi leaned in. She's saying something. He turned on his audio sync. What he heard chilled him. I remember when we forgave each other. Inside the court, time collapsed again. A memory. Her grandfather's hand, trembling, placing a cracked watch in her palm. This was your father's. He wasn't perfect. Neither was I. That doesn't mean we don't go on. The courtroom held still. And then the oldest figure of the 12, the one with no name, no emblem, spoke for the first time. Judgment deferred. The stars flinched, not from war, not from some massive weapon, but from a story, rediscovered. The moment Mira was granted memory retention, the clause rippled outward not as data, but as narrative force. Entire sectors began to remember things they'd been forced to forget, and memory, it turned out, was the most dangerous contagion of all. In the Concord High Assembly, alarms howled across languages. Digital sigils cracked. Old edicts wavered. An ambassador from the Malaktha dropped to her knees, screaming as 3 centuries of redacted conflict came flooding back into her neural lattice. We broke their skies. She wept. We promised protection. We gave them glass cities. Across the Starnet, quarantined histories surged into public record. Treaties edited by authorized Concord scribes began restoring themselves. Names once erased were re-inked in fire. Human names. Inside Archive Level Z, Mira dropped to her knees. Smoke poured from her skin, not fire, but encoded heat. The clause had released its final burden. Ravi reached her side. Mira, talk to me.
Okay.
Voice was hoarse but alive. It's rewriting everything, not just records. Interpretation. She looked at him, eyes filled with painful clarity. They remembered us as a problem, but now they're forced to remember us as people. The lens above Earth's atmosphere blinked online. It had been dormant for decades. A planet, translator and context shaper built by Concord as a passive diplomatic filter. Now it flickered with rewritten legal glyphs. Clause 47B had infected it. Across the galaxy, communications began changing. The story of humanity was no longer a cautionary tale. It had become a precedent. Species across 5 sectors paused their anti-memory protocols. On one distant moon, the insectoid Dravari wept for the first time in collective memory. The humans kept their scars, their hive singer said, and somehow sang through them. Back in the vault, Nothart was unraveling, His skin flickered between diplomats long dead, command interfaces, treaty avatars, even a young Mira from her academy years. You don't understand what you've done, he snarled. This isn't justice. It's narrative warfare. Ravi aimed his weapon, but Mira held up a hand. He's right, she said. This wasn't meant to punish them. It was meant to remind them. And reminders change laws. We wrote a clause that made memory contagious. Elsewhere, far from Earth, a hidden fleet powered by blackout protocols stirred in its cradle. Unmarked ships, silent, operating under an old doctrine. In the event humanity reactivates core memory clauses, initiate sterilization. But this time, as they prepared their jump, their nervous systems flashed red. A clause had been added to their orders. Not by command, but by treaty. Clause 47B acknowledged. Human persistence justified. Authorization for sterilization revoked. The fleet stopped. For the first time in 2 centuries, the kill order on Earth dissolved itself in a bar on Mars. An old woman looked up from a newsfeed scrolling Alien script and wept. On Titan, a 3rd-gen AI monk bowed to a dusty statue of a human child holding a paper scroll. Everywhere, memory rewrote silence, and silence became story. Myra stood up, still trembling. So, That's it, Ravi asked. We win. No, Myra whispered, voice rough. We survive. She looked out at the stars through the flickering treaty glyphs on the vault's screen. But now the galaxy remembers that humans never stop fighting for the truth, and the truth, as it turns out, is more terrifying than any weapon ever built. Because the truth does not sleep. It waits, and when it wakes it rewrites the ending. The stars had new names. Not because galaxies shifted or suns were born, but because the memory of who named them first had been restored. And in that memory, humanity stood again. Somewhere in the Orion Shard conclave, an archivist dropped a sealed vault chip. The casing cracked. Inside a letter, handwritten in a language forbidden for 2 centuries. English. We knew you'd forget. That's why we wrote it down. Because memory is the only resurrection we believe in. Myra Chen, article architect. Tara. In orbit above Earth. Myra stood alone on the deck of a Concorde reconciliation ship, the claws still burning faintly against her chest like a scar that had become a birthmark. Earth's sky had changed, not in stars, but in story, done more preserved for observation. No more species, 581H, precedent of collapse. Species 581H, memory class exception, clause rater sovereignty, status, resurgent. And across the galaxy, species that had once watched her planet as a dying ember now read it as a signal flare. Behind Mira, Ravi approached slowly. Clauses aren't supposed to be alive, he said softly. But I think this one is. Mira didn't look away from the stars. It wasn't the clause, it was the people who wrote it. He was quiet for a moment, then asked, Did you ever think we'd win? She shook her head. I didn't think we'd be allowed to. In the heart of the Concorde High Assembly, chaos had turned to reckoning. Species once loyal to the suppression of memory now openly debated the ethics of historical weaponization. The 12 courts had been dissolved, with a new council formed from those once silenced by redacted history. At the center of their new charter, the right of memory, the right to narrative defense, the right to clause bearing, all seeded by one file. Once buried in the fine print of a forgotten treaty, Clause 47B had rewritten the galaxy not with war, but with the one thing the Concorde never planned for: unforgiving truth, told with terrifying clarity. Mira walked to the edge of the deck, where a new beacon had been installed, one she had insisted on. A library probe, shaped like an old Terran satellite, loaded with human memory in 1,000 languages. Not curated, not cleaned, raw. Messy, angry, brilliant, just like Earth. She placed her palm against the transmitter and whispered, You buried us in fine print, but we left footnotes in fire. The satellite launched into the void, blinking Morse code into the dark. Elsewhere, the not-heart construct was decommissioned, his final iteration stored in a restricted archive, before he vanished. He said only, they weren't dangerous because they remembered. They were dangerous because they made us remember to. Myra returned to Earth 6 days later, or maybe it was 6 years. Time felt different now, as if bound not by stars, but by stories. The city she landed in had changed. A statue now stood in the old plaza, not of her, but of a lawyer, long forgotten, holding a pen like a blade, eyes defiant, feet planted atop a pile of redacted documents at the base. The inscription read, We argued, therefore we are. Ravi joined her, watching as children ran beneath the statue, shouting in at least 5 languages, including Vakari, Aileron, and English. He smiled. Think they'll forget again? Mira turned to him, eyes full of stars, full of scars, full of story. Only if someone stops writing. And somewhere, in some distant court where truth still flickered like candlelight in wind, a new clause was being drafted, not to silence, but to preserve. It began with a single sentence: humanity remembers, and this time the galaxy would too.